I'll carry on dismantling the top of the camera. We can get everything out of it now, film advance and so forth. I need the take-up spool and everything out of the body if I'm going to remove these control arms. And I will remove the reflex mirror prior to doing all of that work because it's easily damaged, and you can damage it permanently just by touching it accidentally with your finger. It's surface silvered. Right. Now the end of film lock is in the up position, so that locked that film advance and allowed me to unscrew that without any arguments. This is all very sticky with dried grease, which is not really a surprise for a camera that's 60 years old. Oh, this screw's loose. That's interesting. If that had been a 3C rangefinder camera, that would have meant that almost certainly the cocking rack would have stripped, because that screw holds this bush down on the top of the camera for the film advance. And if the screw was loose, it allows the bush to rattle about, move away from the ideal position, meaning that you end up with too much clearance at between the gear and the rack, and that in turn leads to prompt failure. That tripod socket doesn't want to lift out straight away. I have to work on that. Okay, so I'll just remove this circlip from the lock lever, if I can get behind it. Well, I've got the spring and the clip. The clip got away. It's alright, I know where to find. Oh, there it is. We've got that, we've got our lever. This one is our release lever. The release lever's job is to free up the film advance so that you can wind on to the next shot after you've pressed the shutter. And that has a small spring on the base of it which keeps it engaged with the cam on the bottom of the film advance. I'm just unhooking that because that's easily lost and damaged too. Rewind button I want off next. I've got a pair of pliers to do that. Okay, so the rewind knob, rewind button rather. Got a pair of pliers here to help me get that off. So the button can go to one side, the washer and the can go to the cleaner. The spring does not. Now there's a screw in here that drives the sprocket from the sprocket shaft, so I'll get that out. That'll allow me to push up the sprocket shaft. Here's the bush from the top of the film advance and the clutch assembly, which gives us our controlled slippage. The sprocket will lift out of the body, and at the base I'll unhook the spring for the rewind button catch. We'll remove that screw. Put the springs with the other springs. Here's the catch. 3 screws hold our film advance bush in place here. they're not loose. It's not uncommon for these to be loose. These ones are not. That's our film advance shaft. I'll recover the 3 screws from the bush. And they all go through the cleaner. That film advance shaft is very, very sticky with dried grease. Okay, so we can take out the sprocket, the take-up spool rather. I want to recover that metal bush that can go through the cleaner. And there we've got the camera body pretty much stripped. You can see the amount of filth in here. None of that is good. And here, yeah. Okay, so I'm going to have to prepare for this. I need to recover my mirror. I need to recover this spring because it's easily lost, and I'm going to be doing a lot of work in here, so there's every likelihood that I will displace that and lose it if I leave that there. So the mirror, I want that mirror off. What I've got to do is lift it up and slide it out of that tray. It's held down with some clips either side. It's just spring tension holds that. Let's see if that mirror will lift. It will. Okay, I want some toothpicks. Slide one under there and one under there. Now I can slide that mirror forward on its tray. That's far enough. Now I can grasp that and slide it out. That mirror I'll put down very carefully. The front surface mirror, the front surface is silvered. You don't want to touch it with anything. Not with your fingers, with nothing at all. Now with that out of the camera, now it's relatively safe. It's been defused if you like. I can work on it without everything likely to turn to custard. So, this lever here I'm concerned with. That should move freely. It does not move freely. What about its mates? Because there's 3 levers here. That one moves okay, that one moves okay, so it's just the front one. It might be bent. In fact, it's likely that it's bent, or there could be some dried grease jamming it, or it could be one of these, those film chips. One of those can get in some narrow space and jam things up, and then nothing moves. Right, there's not much for it. I'm going to have to take that apart. I'm going to take this little arm here off. This piece looks like it's bent to me. That's not at right angles, so that means that's bent. I'm just trying to think if you could influence that by stamping on the shutter release. Possibly. That certainly doesn't look square. That's on the same lever, of course, so if that's bent down, that will be distorting this arm and causing it to jam up. Interesting. I wonder if I can straighten that up in situ. Where's the pliers? So if that was squared up, Would that make any difference? No, it's still just a step. I want to take this moving arm off. There's a lock screw here, and then it unscrews at this point, or possibly pulls out because some of them just pushed in there. See if I can get that lock screw undone. This is where our adjustment for the mirror position, the rest position for the mirror, is determined. Is that going to lift out? Looks like it will. I'm going to take the 2 screws out of this baffle because that's in my way. They're not particularly easy to get at. Tucked down underneath that curved baffle. Now this is loose. There's a washer in between here too that you have to be aware of, because if you are not aware of it, you'll end up losing it or not know where it goes back. Right, time to go mad. There are 2 screws inside the body here that hold all that gear in place, and that does not want to come loose. Okay, I'm going to take this door off so I've got better access. Because I'm going to have to start getting into this. I'm going to have to encourage things with the hammer. These 2 screws here are the ones I need to loosen. They hold this bracket in place, and this bracket in turn holds the arms in place. Now while I'm here, I've got to look at the state of these springs that control these 3 arms. Now I'm looking at those, and there's 3 completely different springs in there, front to back. The one with the most coils is at the front, the one with the intermediate one's behind it, and the one at the back is the lighter gauge of wire by the looks of it. So with that in mind, I'll know where to put the things back, but I do need the hammer. I've got to use the hammer with a nice solid screwdriver to get these screws loose. I'll have to hold this between my knees to do that, so you'll see nothing. Right, those screws are now broken free. It only takes a couple of taps while you're applying a bit of torque on those screws and everything comes loose. Okay, so the screws are undone. Here's the bracket that holds everything in place. Here is where those arms slide, and if this is very sticky with grease, they don't slide. The front arm I can lift that little control arm out. Here's our front arm, let's get that out. It's got the washer on it, as I mentioned, and this was the one that was sticky. I'll have to check this to see if it's straight. I suspect that it's not. The second arm is here, and the third arm is here. This is the one at the back. This one does the capping plate. We have our 3 return springs for those. Coarsest one at the front, intermediate one in the middle, and the lightest one at the back. This is a bit trickier to get out because it's just lined up with another thing. There's our intermediate one. Yep. Okay, that's all the pieces out. I'm not lifting out the capping plate or the mirror tray. They work nice and smoothly. They are another battle all of their own, and I'm not keen to jump into that one unless I need to, and clearly I don't. Right, so the camera body. I want my tripod socket out of here, and then that can go into the cleaner. And then the camera body, I'll have to clean it. I want rid of all of the remains of the old adhesive off here. I'm going to have to use the hammer on that, I'm sorry. I'll have to remove all the remains of the adhesive at the bottom, at the sides. I'll need to do the same around here, of course. And the camera back, what's that like? The leatherette looks good. We won't have to delve into that. I'll get that last screw out, get these components into the ultrasonic cleaner, and after that clean up the body. Well, I have all my components cleaned up, and I was able to check this against a straight edge, just the edge of a rule here, and I can see that it's actually bent. This arm is bent right at that point there. So that's one of the reasons that was stiff, but that's not the only reason. I ran a straight edge over the edge of the body here, and the body's been thumped in at this point. And what that's done is it's thrown these guideposts over this way towards the body, so that they are no longer parallel with this wall, and so that these rods would not move freely on them. So this has certainly taken a big thump. I can see where it is. It's right at this point here, and of course we know that the leatherette on the base of the camera, which sat right there, we know that's damaged. Well, that damage on the leatherette corresponds to where the dent is on the base plate. So the camera's definitely been dropped, and the main cause of our shutter problem is certainly the fact that it's been pushed in here, and the distortion caused in that has caused everything else to jam up. So I will have to see if I can square that up again. Probably easiest if I remove this post here and work on it. But yeah, a little bit of bending, I'm sure that'll straighten up. And of course, because the point of impact was right here close to the front edge, that is why it was the front arm that was most stiff and reluctant to move freely, and the two at the rear appeared to be fairly undisturbed. Well, I wasn't expecting this. Well, I've reassembled the three control arms in there, and if the mirror was cocked down into the set position, it'll hit that arm, and this will come up and allow the mirror to be trapped in place. Of course, the piece that would do the trapping in place isn't in here at the moment, but the mechanism does move. It moves freely and releases freely. So I'm quite happy with the state of that. At the moment, as I say, I've just assembled those pieces in there clean and dry. They've got no lubrication on them at all. But I just wanted to check that once I'd straightened up that front control rod from the front and squared up the body at the base there where it was bent, that this would actually work as I expected it to. And it appears that it's going to, so that's very good. And if it hadn't been for that nasty wound in the leatherette there, I may not have spotted the problem at this point, and I may have been chasing that problem all day. but it's nice when things all tie together. Well, as you can see, I've got that back together now, and it appears to work smoothly enough. That would cock the mirror down to the viewing position, and when you release the shutter, that would flip the mirror up. So that's all working smoothly now, which is what I needed to achieve. So I think that on the basis of that sound, I can go ahead and just reassemble the rest of the body. That's very straightforward. I'm sure you've seen me do that enough times on the Retina Reflex S that you don't need to watch this one. But if I spot anything interesting on the way in with the body servicing, I'll certainly bring it to your attention. Otherwise, I'll get the body serviced and then I'll turn my attention to the shutter assembly, which is certainly sick as well. And I'll have to investigate exactly what's going on here. I suppose I could do some preliminary checks from the outside and see what we've got. And normally you should be able to cock this using a camshaft here from a camera. That should close all the way down. Now those blades do not close right down. Now that's wrong. They should be in the closed position, and then as the capping plate comes up, it frees up that rack and allows it to continue the action. Now there's something seriously wrong there in terms of timing. Now I know that the camera has been serviced before because I can see that there's a lack of paint on that soldered connection. Is it possible that it never worked properly? That's certainly a possibility, but it's much more likely that there's another fault here that needs to be rectified. I'm picking that it's to do with the timing on this rack. That something is wrong there. That's certainly what it looks like on the face of it. Otherwise there's an internal problem with the shutter itself, which is probably less likely. Well, I was curious to see what would happen, so I opened this up, looked at the timing of the gear here on the internal rack, and it looked like it was out to me, and I've put it back where I think it should be, and now the shutter closes completely, and as you lift the bar, it fires completely. I'll show you that with a slower speed. So can that have happened accidentally? To be honest, I don't know how that could happen. So we'll cock the shutter, release the shutter, allow the cam to run down. That gets down to the closed position. Now at that stage the mirror is up, the capping plate is swung back up out of the way. As the capping plate comes up, it strikes this lever, which allows this rack to run down, and it will give us our exposure. In this case, that hasn't timed out at all, so the shutter is certainly in need of servicing. That should have been about a quarter of a second. It didn't run. Yeah, the shutter's not completing. So I think we've got multiple problems. But I'm really not convinced that the camera, yeah, that's better. That's at a higher shutter speed and it worked entirely normally. I'm not convinced that that shutter could possibly have worked correctly. I just don't see any way that timing gear that can jump a tooth. I just don't see how that's physically possible. It can only be that it was reassembled incorrectly, I believe. which means that this camera would have had very funny exposures all its natural life. If that brief instant between the time you trip the shutter and the time the capping plate comes up and trips the rest of the action to allow it to go. But there you go. It's a weird one, this one. Well, I've dug all the way down to the shutter, and it certainly does have a problem with the slow speeds, so that wasn't my imagination. On the 1 second, see if it'll go. There's a brief tick from the timer, and then it's just started again then. But the retard gear train is obviously not running down properly. Now, whether that's the sole problem or whether the problem is that other stickiness in the shutter is basically making that action run very slow, I just do not know. We'll see what it's like on an 1/8 of a second, see if it makes any attempt to work correctly. Yeah, it's not bad that time, so it's freed up a bit. So certainly it was a camera with multiple serious problems. I have got the body all back together, and sitting here now, that's just ready to have the cam put in at the top, and the front of the camera can be put back in place after that, once I've got this shutter serviced, of course, and everything correctly timed. I think the main problem with the shutter is the mechanism plate here. That's just very stiff. It just doesn't want to move smoothly at all. You can hear it squeak. And it's squeaking. That's the sign that metal is rubbing on metal and it's not enjoying it. That'll be the key problem with the shutter itself. That wouldn't have any bearing on the fact that the timing was incorrect in the other mechanism. As you can see, I did get to the end of that Retina Reflex S repair. Here it is, all going. There were no other problems I hadn't noticed. I also had to replace the prism because the prism was shot, but I think I'd probably previously mentioned that. But everything else, I just rectified the problems as I found them, and it's all good now. So we have a good Retina Reflex S camera. It'll always be a mystery as to how somebody came to get the timing wrong with those gears at the back of the shutter, and I'm not entirely clear what ill effects that would have caused for images. I mean, I suspect that possibly there could have been unusual flare effects with high-speed shutters when using a high shutter speed, but with longer exposures that would probably be a lot less pronounced, because it would have been a very short interval where that shutter was partially open and the mirror and capping plate were flipping up before the shutter completed its action and closed. So that was a weird one, but we came to the end of it. We got out of that one, and that little mystery is all dealt with. And the Reflex 3 that came with it, that was far more straightforward by comparison. No great surprises here at all. Everything went smoothly. As you can see, I replaced that top cover. I did attempt to knock the dents out of it, but suffice it to say I was not successful. So this one and its Reflex S companion can now go home, and yeah, they were interesting, particularly that Reflex S. I can't say I'd seen that problem before. It was weird. In fact, both of the major problems with that, the base having been thumped in, that was certainly unexpected, and it had unexpected consequences. Thanks for watching.